It's on now. Yours should be on now. Oh. Mine went on though.
Now I have to push it. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the Planning Commission of Monday, March 18th, 2024. And we'll go through and take the roll.
Okay. Commissioner Hawley.
Here.
Commissioner Stoker. Here. Commissioner Urbani.
Here.
Commissioner Barnes.
Here.
Commissioner Chorin.
Here.
Alderman Parrish.
Here.
Alderman Chair Strelchak.
That's just fine. I'm here. Thank you. Next agenda item is the approval of the minutes. Looking for a motion? Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. We've got G3 Development LLC. The applicant is seeking a certified survey map approval to allow for a 3-lot land division for the property located at 391 Port Washington Road in the extraterritorial jurisdiction of the town of Cedarburg. Second item is Ann and Gary Skiff. The applicant is seeking a minor request for approval to allow for a setback waiver for the property located at 2116 West Dodgers Bay Road.
Second.
Got a motion and a second, and we're going to take up all items. Anything that we want to pull off the consent agenda, or just leave it as is? This works great. All right, all of those in favor of the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. We've got a public hearing for the regular meeting. Robert Deppies for Martin Skills Academy. The applicant is seeking a conditional use grant approval for a fitness center for the property located at 6340 West Dodgers Bay.
Move to go into public hearing.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on this item?
Move to close public hearing.
All right. Not seeing any. Motion and a second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are now out of public hearing. We'll take up this matter. Jack?
I'll take this one.
Okay.
So yeah, this is over on Dodgers Bay by the business park. It's for a fitness center. It's kind of a skills academy, so one-on-one training for a lot of it. The largest class is 12 students for one instructor. That's during the week, and then on the weekends it is by appointment 8 to 9, and then again during the week it's 3:30 to 9, and that's some of the larger classes. Parking wise, like I said, the largest class is 12 students and one instructor, so 13 spaces maximum. That site's got 62, not counting the ADA spaces already, so that's not really an issue. I contacted the applicant and agent multiple times about what kind of equipment or if they were going to do any construction in there. They indicated that there's not going to be any sort of change to the structure at all, and that there won't be any super heavy equipment, but we're still recommending approval with a condition that a final floor plan will be submitted and approved by staff.
Great. Are you the applicant? If you can move uncomfortably close to the microphone, push the button. Does he need to hold it? Yep. Just introduce yourself and anything that you might want to share just initially. Thank you for your application. We're glad to see you.
All right, well, thank you. My name is Chris Martin. I'm the owner of Martin Skills Academy. So I'm just looking for a gym to use to train youth athletes, one-on-one basketball, football, baseball. That's really what my passion is and what I love doing. So.
Good. Thank you. Commissioners, any discussion on this item? We've seen activities like this before, and this fits what I would love to see in there. I do have one question. You list your hours from, 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., I think, in the evenings, Monday through Friday?
3:30 to 9 on weekdays.
Yes. And that is all by appointment only. Everything is, usually it's scheduled ahead of time, one-on-one training.
I'm going to ask for one revision, and I'll have staff say something if, this is inappropriate. When you get a conditional use grant, if you have hours stated in the conditional use grant, if you operate out of those hours, you have somebody in at a lunch hour, you want to do lunch hour training during the week, you're operating out of your conditional use grant. So what I'd like to recommend that if we do get a motion and a second on this, which I'm anticipating we will, that we start the hours at 8 in the morning. Does staff have any objections to that, and then end it at 9 at night? Just to give you the freedom to operate your business and have flexibility
Sure, thank you.
within the space?
Yeah, we've added fluff like that in the past, so that's not a problem.
Okay.
Just a little off the top.
Commissioner Chorin.
I got a question. With the hours possibly running till 9 at night, I'm not familiar with if there's any lighting or if they're required to have any outside lighting.
They're not required. I don't know if there's lighting already on there.
So it's not required. Okay. I mean, they're close enough to Johns Bay. There might be some lighting spill off from the street. Okay.
This is one space in a multi-use building, correct?
Correct.
Move for approval.
Got a motion for approval?
Second.
Any condition on hours to help them out?
Accepting your, is that amendment, would you say?
It would come in your motion. You'd offer approval with the amendment of the hours.
Well said.
So 8 a.m. to 9 p.m.?
Correct.
Great. Got a motion and a second on the table. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That vote carries. Thank you. Welcome to the community.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. And then in regular business, we have Karen and Gerald Splitgerber. The applicant is seeking a minor request approval to allow for 2 specimen trees to be removed for the property located at 12360 North Lakeshore Drive. Jack, just a little background on this would be great. Evan?
So yeah, this is kind of constrained site a little bit. The minimum street frontage for R3, which this is 200 feet, or I'm sorry, R2 is 200 feet, and this is 100. So their side yard setbacks can be reduced by to 75%, which is 18.75 feet, which you can kind of see from the sides there. And then it's still 50 feet from the right-of-way, and 75 feet from the bluff is the zoning setback. But the applicant had an engineer's report that says that 125 is the recommended setback from their consultant. So with the 75-foot setback from the bluff, that leaves them with a building area of about 11,600 square feet. But with the 125-foot setback, that leaves it with about 8,000 square feet approximately. And then there's an 18-foot protection zone with those white cedar trees in the middle of that too. So that decreases it even a little bit more. It takes the width down to about, I think in the report it says about 32 feet, I believe. And then I know Mikey's had.
Hi, Mike.
How we doing? So, a couple of things. So this, because of the restrictiveness of the narrowness of the lot, kind of with what Evan was just saying, we don't think that their survivability is real good on these white cedars, given that there's also a pre-existing driveway footprint that was within 12 inches or so of the base of these root zones. And both of them aren't in very good shape. So they've been both growing together. They were planted probably post 1970, from what we can tell from the imaging, just as garage screening. So they wouldn't have been indigenous to this particular lot. They're white cedars, so they're on the specimen list, but they're not something that would have been part of a remnant mesic chunk or anything like that. So because of that narrowness of the lot and the construction traffic going in, the driveway, the pre-existing driveway being so close to the root zones, and the fact that they're almost touching, where they're defoliated on probably 2/3 of each side. So one is defoliated on the north side, one's defoliated on the south side because they're almost touching. We didn't feel good about having to recommend that these two trees stay because they won't look like anything once the construction is done. And I don't think the survivability of either one of them is good once the construction is complete. And that doesn't matter on the size of the house at all. It has to do with more of the construction traffic coming in and off the site. I can't recommend that the trees would be in good shape after construction, even if we put protection zones around them.
Perfect. And then the one was damaged by a vehicle in a previous accident.
Yeah, so there's a big branch wound, where the collar is actually torn off of the one that's closest to the pre-existing driveway also. So
I typically follow your recommendation when it comes to these things, so I always call you up to ask you whether
that's fine.
I'm chairing the meeting or not, so.
One question.
Commissioner Barnes?
Yeah, question, in that this lot, with all the discussion on the slopes, et cetera, does removing the tree, as simple as that, could that disturb and aggravate the stability?
Yeah,
That's really all I'm wondering about.
yeah, where these trees are, it would not. They're so far away from where the bluff setbacks even are that you're not within that envelope of the bluff setback. So I'm not concerned with anything as far as like removing the trees and then providing some additional instability at the bluff. So
Commissioner Urbani?
I had a question too. On the visual up here, I can see the two 18-inch cedars, but then there's another 18-inch cedar and a 22-inch cedar.
Yep.
Are those not recommended? Are they not on the specimen
yeah,
list?
they would be outside of the footprint, the build footprint, and because they're, and I don't think those are cedars. I can't see anything without my glasses on. But
I thought that red rectangle was the proposed footprint.
yeah, I know there's additional cedars on site, but all of them are going to be outside the scope of work, and so they're going to be the ones that we're talking about are further to the south. Just kind of referencing the site without being able to see that image, but all of the ones that remain should be outside of that envelope. And we weren't concerned about the construction traffic either. I mean, they're an additional probably like 12 to 14 feet away from even that pre-existing driveway. So even if they were to take the pre-existing driveway out, the remainder of the cedars would be able to be preserved.
Okay. Thank you.
Any additional discussion? Feel free.
Motion to approve per staff's recommendations.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you for coming before us tonight. Good seeing you. Good luck. That concludes the regular business portion of the meeting. We're going into policy. First policy item is we're going to review Chapter 58. Is it Article 11?
Yes.
Okay, you got Roman numerals, so it says XI, of the municipal code related to floodplain zoning. What I'd like to do here is just have Jack go through just kind of an overview, share briefly what we discussed at council. I don't know that you need to redo the entire presentation you did to council, as you provided that link within the packet. We had a lengthy conversation with Alderperson Talaco today. Just wanted to make sure that we address any of her talking points, as a lot of the residents are in her district that have reached out with concern. Furthermore, I'd like to highlight, we do have a couple people in the audience today. If you're here to, listen to and talk about this item and would like to speak, there's cards in the back if you want to fill that up and bring that up here. You'd be given an opportunity to talk on this as well.
Sure. So just a summary, we have to adopt a certain number of things by a certain date in order to stay eligible for the National Flood Insurance Program. So that includes the model ordinance, the updated FEMA maps, and a flood storage district. And I'll get into that a little bit later, and potentially the Little Menominee Creek study that was done by Sewer Pack. Every so many years, FEMA updates the floodplain maps for the area. Last ones were done in 2007. Prior to that was 1991. So these are new maps. We have to adopt them by July 31st of this year. If we don't adopt them, we would just be suspended from the program, which means nobody in the city would be eligible for flood insurance.
FEMA-backed flood insurance.
FEMA-backed, yes,
Okay.
correct.
Yep, just for point of clarity.
Sure.
Yep.
So we did, like as the Alderman Strelczyk said, at Committee of the Whole on the 12th, we did a presentation on basically just FEMA's background information regarding the floodplain policy, some of the trials and tribulations we go through enforcing our ordinance. We put the link in the video. I'm sure you all watched it. We're enthralled by all the information in there. It was very, very good meeting, and out of that meeting we got some policy direction from the council, which we incorporated into this ordinance. That was on a Tuesday. We had to get this done by Thursday, so there wasn't time to finish everything, but we got pretty far along enough to get you a model ordinance that you can take action on and hopefully approve, because this will have to go to council for first reading next month and then for public hearing in May, which gives us a little time just in case there's some issues with DNR and FEMA with regard to adoption. So some of the bigger policy issues that the city approved at the Committee of the Whole meeting was, one, we would adopt the Act 175 provisions. Act 175 was a legislative act from 2019 that the state basically says we're going to kind of eliminate the 50% rule for people in the floodplain as long as you comply with certain provisions. And one of the biggest ones is to obviously elevate the structure. So it basically gets it out of the floodplain, and then we'll let you build, add on or remodel the house without being restricted by this 50% rule. So that's an option that communities had, and the city felt that was good for the residents of the community to have that option. So we added that language in. There's another section in there with regard to the community rating system. This is a program that provides flood insurance discounts for communities that accept it based on a scoring scale. The council was kind of split on that. They weren't really sure how they wanted to go on that. I did leave the provisions of the CRS in there, which are shown as in the comment sections. That's something that they want to strip out. They can strip that out at the last minute, and I don't think DNR will have an issue with it, obviously, because it's a voluntary program. The rest of the language in the code is basically stuff that I had changed, and I can start going through those a little bit one by one if you'd like. There were things in there that we could eliminate right away. There was a whole section on cranberry bogs, which we don't have in the city. And there was a whole section on coastal floodplain, which we do have some along Lake Michigan, but we're protected by a 110-foot bluff. So that all that was been stripped out of the code. So what you see here is just changes to that, the model ordinance that I've made since Tuesday that kind of more likely just clarify what we're trying to do here. We can't be less restrictive than DNR's ordinance. We can be more restrictive, or we can keep it the same, but we can't be less restrictive. So some of this stuff you could interpret as being more restrictive, but it's really just clarifying some language in the code, because I think when staff reviewed this, and we had a meeting with DNR reps, I thought some of it was rather vague in terms of what the language meant, and I really didn't get clear answers. So that's what you'll see in some of the comment sections that we still need to clarify. So one of the good news, or for the residents that live in the area, one of the good news is that, and I have the screen up, this is from page 7 of the ordinance, section C. Basically, this allows people that have received a LOMA, which is a letter of map amendment, they're considered out of the floodplain, which seems intuitive in a sense, but for years you could be out of the FEMA federal floodplain requirements, but you still would be in the state floodplain requirements. And it was really difficult to enforce because we didn't know if they were in the states or not. So you could have a resident go through the LOMA process, get approved, and say, okay, I'm on the floodplain. Well, not so fast. If you are less than 2 feet above the base flood elevation, you still might have to be in the state program. So this basically changed that, and I think it's nice and it clears. So I added that little comment about doesn't have to comply with section A above, which just makes it clear for residents that were reading this that once they get their LOMA, they're out of the floodplain. They don't really have to worry about any other provisions that are in this ordinance. I'll go through it change by change. There was a section in here, and I'll clarify this a little bit. So this section talks about reasonably safe from flooding, and I asked the DNR what reasonably safe from flooding was, because there was no definition of it. And they said, well, it's just you have to be in accordance with Technical Bulletin 10, which Technical Bulletin 10, which we do have a copy of, it does talk about reasonably safe, but doesn't really define it either. But this is the best definition I could find. They do talk about below where it says flood-prone area. There's no definition here of that as well, but I did find one in the Technical Bulletin 10, so I will add that as well. Some of this stuff, as you'll see, is somewhat vague in how to interpret, and I think that's been our problem for the last 15 years or so when we adopted the previous model ordinance, that there's a lot of debate on what some of this stuff means. So I'll just continue to go through some of the language here. This is basically the red lines here are just clarifying and codifying language. I did increase letter D. This is mechanical and utility equipment must be elevated to the base flood elevation. I actually added a foot there just to give some freeboard. I don't think we want transformers and mechanical equipment at the base flood elevation. It'd be nice to get that up a foot. That really isn't a significant cost to anybody in terms of a residence. And this is relatively rare. This is if you're doing a subdivision and they want to bring in transformers, they'd have to do this. When we do subdivisions, if they're anywhere near the floodplain, we keep all development outside the floodplain and put them in an outlet. It's just so much easier, and we don't have to worry about anybody doing anything that's going to be in violation of this ordinance. So we thought this was a relatively safe thing to add. And I did number 2 above. I just kind of clarified that the lowest finished floor is 2 feet above the base flood elevation. This is again if a subdivision is proposed or new development in a flood-prone area. Again, we won't typically see this on a normal basis because we require them to be out of it completely. So I struck out a whole section on public and private campgrounds. We really don't have any of those in Mequon that would fall into this category, so that's been all removed. This is language about non-structural, industrial, and commercial uses. We're a little unique here compared to a lot of communities. We actually have a floodway zoning district and a flood fringe zoning district in addition to the FEMA maps, which actually don't match one another right now if you did watch the video or looked at the slide. So we'll have to fix that at one point, but we have base zones that are mostly residential or park. We don't typically have any industrial or commercial uses, so I just struck anything related to that. And we'll eventually clear this up and clean it up and refer back to that base zone in terms of what uses are allowed, but we took out
Hey,
anything.
Jack. Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
This is the one thing I circled on my review of your changes, which were
Sure.
very good. But I wasn't sure why you had to remove section 3.22 about non-structural, industrial, and commercial uses such as loading areas, parking areas, because I do find those to be very common. Where an industrial building or commercial building could be near commercial, and they are relying on that excess area for parking when it's not flooded, or
This is in the floodway district, and I'm not aware of any properties in Mequon that are in the adjacent to any commercial area or industrial
there can be
area.
parcels though where it's like most of the parcel is zoned industrial, and then part of it is like the floodway zoning, right?
I don't think there's any of that. I can verify that, but most of our floodway is along the river.
Okay,
We
that's
have
what I was
very-
envisioning right there.
What's that?
If you could just double check.
Yeah, I
that.
can double check that, but the reason I didn't like it in here was that and in fact, we had a circumstance several years ago that somebody said, I want to put a landing, basically for a helicopter in the floodway because it wouldn't be allowed anywhere else in Mequon, but he thought, okay, if you have floodway zoning, and our current one does say airports, so then.
Yeah, that one made sense to remove.
Yeah, so
for
that's why
sure.
I was just like, we don't even want to go down that path. These are just
hear
what FEMA puts in there, but we still should have control over our own land use decisions. So I'll
thank
double
you.
check just to make sure I'm not causing any issue with any current or existing industrial or commercial user, but I'm
I'd
pretty sure
appreciate that, thanks.
most of them are residential.
And then my question, piggybacking off of that, I know our parks have parking and parking lots and things like that where you listed out. I want to make sure that we're not striking out a portion of the ordinance and making our park space, Villa Grove being specific, non-compliant based on what we have there.
No, in fact, there's other if you look below under 3, which says uses and structures accessory to permanent public open space uses, or classified as or historic structures. So this is where the only thing I changed here was permanent public open space, because I think in the past people have said, well, I have open space in my yard, so I should be able to do this, and that's not really the intent of it. So again, I wanted to clarify. And this is actually standards. What we're looking at here is in the general floodplain. So there's different levels of this. So I tried to clean it up at all of them. So, and then again, you can see under 5 functionally water dependent public uses such as docks, piers, things like that. So this would again apply to the parks area. I did remove the section that allows for portable latrines. We've had some issues with some porta potties in areas that we don't necessarily want them, so this would eliminate the ability to put those in floodway zones. And I don't think that's a big issue for any other areas of the city that I could think of. And then we also removed the wastewater treatment ponds or facilities in there as well. I just don't know why we would want that in our floodway zoning. So again, structures, I just added public to the open space uses just to make sure that's clear that it's public. I'm just going to keep going. Here was another one where you need a definition. They talk about adequate flood-proofing measures, but they don't really just define what that is. I think we need a definition. Prohibited uses, it says all uses not listed in 3.2 are prohibited, but then it says including the following. I don't know why that's needed. It's just if they're not listed there, they are prohibited. I don't know why we have to list all things that we are already prohibited to begin with. This change seems minor, but currently our flood fringe district is an overlay district, so FFO, which means that you could have a base zone of residential, which dictates all your uses, dictates your setbacks. They changed it for some reason to just flood fringe. So I put it back to flood fringe overlay. I did talk to FEMA about, our DNR about this. They don't seem to have an issue with it. I don't know why the change was made, but I wanted to put that back in because we do have uses in our flood fringe overlay that would be different than the base zone. We want to make sure that we just incorporate all the base zones. So I did add that. As you can see here, it says standards for development in the flood fringe in addition to those in the base zoning district. Here's one of those examples of the CRS. This is it's in purple on the screen. If you partake in the CRS program and you want to get additional points, you add 1 foot above the base regional flood elevation instead of the base right at the base flood elevation. So this is one of those things where this is more restrictive, but you get a break for it. And I think the council is kind of not really sure about how to handle that. And again, they could take that out as we go forward in this process. And then to address your issue again with under number 4, manufacturing and industrial uses, this would be the flood fringe. Now, if there's a property in the flood fringe, it says unless otherwise prohibited. So this is where if the base zoning doesn't allow industrial, then you couldn't do this. But if the base zoning would allow for it, then you would be able to do it. So this is a little different. We talked about actually having the floodway as an overlay, but that's another zoning nightmare that would be difficult to do. Storage materials, that's a relatively minor change. I struck the manufactured home section. The mobile recreational vehicles, I kind of mirrored. I remember you guys maybe remember a few months ago we changed the RV requirements for how long they could stay on site. We just actually adopted that section as part of this, and then we added the FEMA DNR requirements for being fully licensed and ready for use and meet the anchoring devices. So if you remember, we allow them from October till May. Instead of just saying that it can be on 180 consecutive days. We don't want those there in the wintertime, so I think they'll be okay with that. This is considered probably a little bit more restrictive, but I think it's clarifying our current ordinance for people that have recreational vehicles outside the floodplain and they match one another. Again, this is some more CRS language that if we want to adopt, we would change the language to match this above. This is about, instead of 2 feet, it goes up to 3 feet. This is just adding additional freeboard protection in case there's a flood and there's ice jams or other sort of damming that requires it to go higher. Just going to keep going through. This is kind of an issue we had recently at our Board of Appeals, and it was rather vague, and we got about 3 or 4 different interpretations from FEMA. They've actually expanded the definition a little bit, which even makes it more confusing. In the past, you were allowed a deck that did not exceed 200 square feet adjacent to the wall of a property in a floodway, and it was considered not an extension, modification, or addition. And then now they've added a new section that says the roof may extend over a portion of the deck in order to provide safe ingress egress. I felt we needed a square footage on that requirement because you have a 200 square foot deck you could say that I have 100 square foot for ingress egress with not having any doors, and it's a difficult thing to enforce without having a standard. So we chose 9 square feet, which is basically a 3x3 landing, which is required per code for safe ingress and egress out of a building. And we also clarified single deck because there was a disagreement, I think, at our Board of Appeals meeting of whether that's a single deck or just any deck. And at one point, the DNR had an interpretation that they said you could have multiple decks as long as they were 1 inch apart. And we thought that was a little bit insane. And so we did ask for that legal opinion in writing, and they kind of backtracked and said, no, I guess that's not what we were saying. So this just clarifies you get 1 single deck. Now, this doesn't say you can't have more than 1 deck in the floodway, but if you have an additional deck, then you have to comply with the 50% rule if your property is not a Act 175 property, or you would have to get a H&H study done to determine if it's going to have any adverse impact on the hydraulics of the river. So that's just one of the minor changes, but I think some people were concerned about whether this is a restriction or not. I just see it as a clarification, and we can change that number to whatever you feel comfortable with. I just chose 9 square feet again because of 3x3 landing. Other than that, this is just clarifying some language in there I thought was poorly worded, which I did talk to DNR about. This is another CRS requirement. This is one that if you adopt the section, you actually dryland access is not required, and I just wanted to clarify that because I thought it was kind of strange that it wasn't required, but she confirmed that with me, but I wanted to make a point in our code to say that it's not required. Again, this is more CRS requirements. This is where I struck manufactured homes again. Again, recreational vehicles, I did the same language as the previous section. It's another CRS requirement. This one just talks about when human lives are endangered. I didn't know what that meant. I think we need some sort of definition because that's rather vague. And then this is some legal clarification I need from our attorney regarding the provisions section, the administration section. And that's really a majority of the changes we made. Again, we're kind of hamstrung here. We can't be more restrictive, or we can't be less restrictive. So we try to just clarify as best we can. And as you can see, there are still some things we still want to work out. So we want to get Planning Commission's okay to go forward with this as we kind of work with our city attorney to figure out some of these languages. And I put an asterisk in front of all of them, like this one: standard floodproofing measures shall be designed as appropriate. I'm not sure what appropriate means. So again, we should have some sort of standard in there. So that's basically all I have. It seems like a lot. It is a lot. It's technical. I'm not sure if the commission's really their purview, but it's in Chapter 58, so it needs to be recommended by this body to go on to Common Council. So I'm here to answer any questions, and we can take it as far as you like in terms of any aspect of this you want to discuss further.
Commissioner Barnes.
And just one real basic question. It's going back to the exhibits that are labeled, let's see, on page 136 and 137. It's simply the map, the 2 maps that are labeled impacts of 2024 map changes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the printout and what I was looking at, but could you explain a little bit about
Sure. In
what
fact,
we're seeing on each of them and what's...
Sure, and I can actually, I
what's the
have it on the
feature?
GIS. That was just a PowerPoint slide, but this is the actual
Sure.
GIS, and I'll kind of zoom in. It's really hard on your screen. It kind of gets faded out, but so what I did here is I overlaid the current and the proposed. So the red is proposed, the blue is the current. So anywhere you see red is where it actually increases because you can see it. Now this is probably the area of the city that is probably the most impacted by it in several ways. Number one, it adds a significant amount of red to the area. But number two, if I turn off, as you can see, see this hatch line? That's the floodway line, which is a lot more restricted than the flood fringe, which is the blue. But if I turn this off, you'll see that that red now is all, the hatched red is all over here. So now all these properties have become part of the floodway, and some of the stuff on the other side of the river, along River Road, is also floodway, where they weren't before. So this is probably the most restrictive area of terms of where the new ordinance has an issue. There are other spotted ones, that's where anytime you see red on this map, it shows where that's actually grown. We had an interesting discussion today with Alderwoman Tlaco about this, and I did do some checking on it because she was concerned about the elevations. And one thing that doesn't quite make a lot of sense to me is that some of these areas, the flood elevation went up close to a foot or even more than a foot, but the map really doesn't show the boundary exchange enlarging that much, which is somewhat surprising to me. But as I stated, the only way we can kind of disagree with these maps would be to have some sort of empirical data that shows that they're wrong, which is something the council kind of discussed, which would be, first of all, very costly, and it would be time consuming. So we're not going to be able to figure that out by July 31st. So
is a lot of that change just simply reflection from the data?
it's update, yeah, it's all the modeling they punched in and figure out how they did it. I mean, you know, and I don't disagree that there are certain areas, I've been here now 18 years, I've seen probably 5 or 6 100-year floods. Certain areas don't seem to get a lot of water. Some areas do. So I could see the modeling not be perfect. And it's interesting that this area, for me, has become so much worse because if you look at, I mean, let me pull back. So this is our current mapping, and I want to show you. So this is that same area. Now all this blue area is flood fringe, but all these little boxes that look like houses, those are all LOMAs, letter of map amendments, that were all approved after the 2007 maps were adopted. So all these people were originally said to be in the floodplain. Then they all got out by getting their LOMAs approved because of elevation. But if you look at it now, they're kind of all back in, and they're all some are floodway. The problem is that area this is by River Barn Park, that area is so flat there that 6 inches to a foot makes a huge difference in where you are. So I think you're still going to see some changes to that area with regard to LOMAs, but sometimes the modeling just ain't perfect. You'd have to spend, millions of dollars to figure out exactly, and I think they do what they can. And again, we have the option to do our own modeling, but there's a significant cost to that, and they still have to approve it anyway, and that's not going to get done by July 31st. So.
Microphone.
This map right now I don't have is public right now. This is my internal ArcGIS Pro site and then this is our internal website. FEMA or the county does have, I think, has the floodplain on the Ozaki County GIS site as well, but it doesn't have all of our zoning data and other data that we have. But this I think you can see at the county level.
Maybe a recommendation to put a link to that on the website and our header so people can find it quickly.
Yeah, eventually we will get our own out there. This site that we show here, this will hopefully be public at one time, but we were still in the process of cleaning things up because this has more than just floodplain on it. This has all of our city data, but it's still not quite 100% done.
So is the map that happens to be on page 136 and then another one on 137? Are they simply showing kind of a representation of what you were just showing us?
Sure, I think you're in the
colors?
PowerPoint. I'm going to go right to the PowerPoint itself. So, yeah. So this map here is basically the same one I just showed you. So this is area where the floodplain has gotten bigger. And then this one shows where it's gotten smaller. So any place you see any blue up like in this area here, that it's actually gotten smaller because the blue's going away. So that's the difference between the two. So again, not a lot of shrinkage going on, but there are some areas that have seen some increases.
The orange on that?
What's that?
The red, I gather, is...
Red is, well, there's different colors of red. The dark red is zone AE, which is a base flooded elevation determined. The orangish color is like a zone A, which is there is no base flood associated, but it's still floodplain. So the blues would go away. Anything shades of blue goes away. Anything reddish stays.
Commissioner or Alderman Parrish.
Thank you. So how often are these maps updated?
Last one was 2007, and then the one before that was 91, and then our first initial ones were back in the early 70s.
Okay, well, just to complain a little bit, because we didn't at council, I don't understand if it hasn't been updated for 20 years, like why is it such a fire drill in like 3 months to vet this and approve it?
Well,
That's
actually,
absurd
it's
to
been a
me,
longer
but-
process. It's just that there's not a lot of public notice to these meetings. So basically, this is the process that we're in, and we're actually like way over here. You know, I originally went to discovery meetings and work maps with FEMA and DNR reps, but there was really nothing I could say. At that point, what they wanted to know from us is, what work have you done in the city that may impact the floodplain? Like, have you done any dredging? Have you done any culvert replacement? Things like that. So this is where they look at all the studies that were done. So we gave them some info. I think we had some culvert work done on Freistadt that came through, and then they look like at the study that Deansville did. Unfortunately, they had a public hearing, and that was during COVID. It was a virtual meeting only, and they don't notify all the residents. They just they put it in a newspaper, and that's about it.
Yeah,
So
just to clarify, that wasn't a criticism of Mequon.
No,
staff.
I
It
know.
just feels like the process, be it has been going on a while, yet these property owners, and this is, I guess, just to update Planning Commission, I mean, what Common Council really struggled with was the vast amount of parcels that are affected by this and are either becoming rendered unbuildable, or people thought they had something and all of a sudden they don't. You know, there are good things about this, like being able to actually, you know, expand and, you know, after you raise the elevation by 2 feet. So we did ask staff to look into an audit, and to Mr. Zader's point, you know, that's crazy that it would be $1 million. I guess in hindsight, maybe what we would have asked would be for you to take a look, or have a consultant look at their underlying assumptions as applied to the map, because it really is, as I look at all the red, you know, these are homes that have been there forever, and then, you know, why aren't they grandfathered in? Like, why are the homes themselves being...
Well, they are in a sense grandfathered in. The whole section that we looked at was all based on non-conforming uses. So these properties are all non-conforming uses. So they are allowed to do certain things, but it's restrictive.
Okay, so when if a house burns down, or think of the worst case, I'm just trying to understand, they cannot rebuild in these zones, right?
If it burns down, technically they can under certain conditions. If it's damaged by a flood and destroyed, then they can't. That's another the little idiosyncrasy of the ordinance.
Wow.
So
I wish we could show the taxpayers and the residents affected that we tried a little harder. I'm worried about them finding out after the fact, and then they're just gonna really be very upset. Why didn't you notify us? So
we are gonna we at the council level. I don't know if you recall, we did talk about having a workshop.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
whether or not we do that, I think we could start including it in our weekly city
Yeah.
notifications. Like, let's show the map
And we're working on a date for that, so we'll do
Yeah.
that. The hard part's going to be, it's still going to be, I think, frustrating, because we can explain everything to them, but we're still not really in a position to do any kind of changes.
But at least they can go in eyes wide open, and then like you educated us, they do have recourse, which is to hire their own essentially surveyor and go fight their own case. But for each property owner to do that would be incredibly expensive. So that's why it would be nice if there was any last ditch effort. That's why the council threw out the audit idea, just to show we tried, but it sounds like a fortune. So
We're getting numbers on
yeah,
this.
I just wanted to update the planning commission and our discussion.
And just to clarify for those that didn't watch the video or look at the presentation, that we're not required to adopt any of this. This is voluntary, but again, you do not get federal flood insurance if you do not participate. And I brought up at the council meeting the whole Wisconsin Dells 2008 flood. They did not adopt their maps in 2001 because they did not feel they were done right. And when 08 came, they were not eligible for disaster assistance, and a lot of those people didn't have flood insurance because of it. So, I mean, they did, I think there was some agreement made at one point to soften the blow a little bit, but a lot of people there got hurt pretty bad because they weren't part of the program. So you have to be careful.
Yeah, and I'd just like to mirror the statements that, you know, council is reasonably uncomfortable, you know, working through some of this stuff because, you know, it's a governing body that gives us a report. Mayor Nervin shared that he's an engineering report coming in as an engineering report, and, you know, they're either a tool to make decisions with, but they're never 100% accurate. And I think what we're challenging, and what Alderperson Talaco brought up today is, you know, she's challenging some of the accuracies. So I mirror that sentiment based on the examples that we've talked about either here or internally. And then, you know, again, what we're looking for is a way to go back forward and see what we can do to challenge a few of these things. You know, that process sounds daunting at this point. I'm sure there's other options out there, and we've got a couple aldermen that'll help you get creative with how we approach that, and we'll reach out individually to challenge these people because, you know, where Alderperson Tolako's got a lot of riverfront property. That was my district. That's where I got elected, and that's where I, you know, came into council and promised to protect. So that promise doesn't go away just because you're not assigned to me currently. Yeah. Just, we agree it's frustrating. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to come up with the best coverage for the residents in the meantime as we work through this, the best opportunities so that if something does happen in a flood situation, that we've got the most opportunities for residents to either, you know, rebuild, remodel, or do whatever they need to do to get their home back into livable conditions and in a way that they'd want to see it. So, you know, that being said, just turning it back over to additional questions. Commissioner Stoker.
I appreciate the fact that you didn't, I feel like you didn't make it more restrictive in many cases at all. I think you were trying to be as lenient as possible. But I do have a question, and it's probably because I don't understand. Going back to the covered deck and the ability to have a covered deck for egress, I don't even understand the concept. Why would you need a roof for egress?
That was something that they changed in their ordinance. I'm assuming they must have complaints from communities that said that they need a cover over that portion of the deck or something. So, because I asked about it, I was like, where did this come from? She's like, I'm not really sure. I'm like, well, how do you interpret it? She's like, I don't know. It could be any size. I'm like, well, there should be a standard to it because I don't want to be the one determining what's safe in ingress, egress. I mean, somebody could make an argument that I need a 50 square foot roof and they don't even have a door. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I prove that or make that case without having an actual ordinance that dictates that? So, so we could change it. We don't have to just do a square footage requirement, but you could have a patio door. You could have another man door. You could have a couple different doors there. So then, do they get one for every one of them? Again, I just think this is stuff that most of these ordinances are created by people that don't work in zoning on a daily basis. I don't think so. They don't really think of these issues that we see on a daily basis.
So my comment would be, assuming it's to give you some protection from the elements as you're entering a door or leaving, 9 square feet, even I understand you need the 3x3 pad for a code but to have something aesthetically on a building that's 9 square feet is going to look disproportionate. It needs to be larger than the area. So I think your 9 square feet is a little low. And then I also think of a sliding patio door in the case of a deck. Is 9 square feet going to do you any justice? My suggestion would be to increase the number. I'm not saying you need to have 200 square feet, but I think if you're trying to have some sort of protection from elements at a place of egress, and you can state that it has to be at a place of egress, meaning there's a door, I think it needs to be larger. Just an observation.
Any idea on a number?
I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not a designer, but I know you can't just draw a 3x3 roof over. It would look.
Yeah.
It needs to be larger than the area you're covering.
And it also depends on how big the deck is too. Is scale. It could be in proportion. So, I mean, I can try to work on it some more. And I don't know if any other communities even made a change to that or just kept it the way it is. I don't feel comfortable keeping it kind of open-ended like that.
I guess I'm going to the other end of the spectrum. Who cares if it's 200 square feet? What difference does it make? Why would that be objectionable?
From whose standpoint?
The cities or anyone. I don't know. I'm trying to.
I don't have an objection to it no matter what it is. But number one, I think it is actually contrary to the definition of a deck. Because if you look in that same code section under definitions, a deck is an uncovered structure. So now we're saying you can have an uncovered structure, but you can have a cover on it. And then I don't want to be in a position that we just recently, and I don't know if this would happen in this case, but we get audited by DNR, and we just got our audit about a week ago. This is the first time we had one in maybe 10 years, but they came through and they look at ortho photos from 2022 to 2018 or 2015, and they see differences in the floodplain, and they say, explain to me how you guys approved this. So we have to go through all the paperwork and explain all that. So I don't want to do something where they're going to question me. So I like it from a zoning standpoint. I like it as clear and defined as possible. So
I appreciate that. And I guess my question, the way at least I read it and briefly looking at it is, they're okay up to 200 square feet, the DNR. Is that not what?
She didn't really give us a position on what that actual was. She's like, I didn't really look at it. Never really looked at that as what it
Again,
is. So
I
we
think
could,
it's-
we can, if you want to clarify 200 square feet, we can clarify 200 square feet. I just would prefer to have a number in there than anything else.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm not saying 200 square feet is a magical number, but if it's really truly meant for means of egress, and then I think you should pick a number that's bigger than 9. I don't know that you got to go to 200. And yes, I'm going to leave it in your hands for a great number.
Okay. Fair enough.
I've got input on the number. I mean, if you've got a sliding door and/or perhaps another access door, you're going to need a decent amount of space. That needs to stick out, several feet. I'm thinking 6 feet, from that. If you want true protection from, wind and rain that's blowing, I would recommend a size in the 60 to 80 square foot range for that. It'll afford a little freedoms for people, but I don't think that that's unreasonable.
I'm thinking of wheelchair access too. 3 feet with a wheelchair. I understand the code is landings, but if you're wheeling someone up and you're trying to open a door and you've got someone sitting in a wheelchair, it'd be nice to have. I like your 60 square feet number. I think it's a good number.
Yeah, I mean, you could get into so many different variations on a patio door. Your deck might be 20 feet out. Are you going to put 2 posts midway through your deck to support the roof structure at that point? No, probably not. So
You're going to cantilever.
yeah, you're going to cantilever it. So that poses another problem, in terms of support. So, I just want to have a number in there so it's defined so that everybody gets treated the same way, and I don't have to sit there and decide, well, this is a good egress amount for you, and then but your neighbor it's not. So that's our main goal. So if we want to come up with a number and we can continue to work on this before our May adoption at council, I'll look into see if I can find anything else, but
Commissioner Stoker's recommending we look at the ADA standards, to set a platform size, where somebody would need to get in and be able to shift, allow for a wheelchair to get into the facility.
Okay.
I'm thinking, I was thinking 80 when we talked earlier today. I just kind of like that as a number if we at council choose to take that and round that down a little bit, because that might be too big for some. We still have 60 as a reasonable benchmark. But I do have an architect here, so any feedback on that?
Well, I think typically, if you
Into the microphone though, because nobody at home unfortunately can hear us.
on a ramp when you have a change in or a change in elevation or a run, 5x5 is the turning radius. So, is 25 square feet the right one? I don't know.
yeah, again, there's really, technically ADA doesn't really apply on single family, so we're looking at a commercial code section, but I just think whatever we come up with, we should be basing it on some rationale somewhere. So I'll look and see what I can find out, and we could further refine this number as we go forward, but it should be based on something other than just pulling a number.
Great. Any additional feedback or any extra questions? Did you want to come up and say something? I want to make sure you're included.
Hi, thank you. I'm District 2 Representative Alderman.
And we need to get really close to the mic because I can't
My
hear
name
you
is
up
Kelly
here.
Tlaco. So I've been researching this. This is very passionate to me. The deck square footage, I was trying to figure out why it's 200 square feet, right? Because we have these rules on the books, and it's like, why 200? Why not 205? Why not 95? Why is it 200, right? And no one can give me an answer. So I find that very fascinating because we have to get these numbers from somewhere. So based, kind of doing a little bit of critical thinking, my assumption is that a 200 square foot deck started because of the typical size of a house. And when you're building a house, usually it's a percentage of your downstairs space of what you would build your deck, right? So it's like, I don't know exactly the percentage, maybe you do. But that's typically, I think, how they calculated stuff. So this 200 square foot, I think, is almost arbitrary in some cases. So like having an egress that is 200, like a roof over it, I don't know if it really matters, and these are answers that I feel like need to get addressed before approving this new floodway ordinance. So that's just like food for thought, because we don't really have a full answer on that. So other than that, this is a huge step forward. Doing the Act 175 is going to help give us a little bit more freedom. And I feel like there's a lot of work that needs to go further on this in order to make it so that it is for our citizens. Some of these rules were established so long ago that I think that's why Jack has had issues like getting answers, because no one really knows and it's kind of outdated. And I feel like this is Mequon's turn to maybe lead it in a way to say, look, we want to preserve the river, we want to keep this natural resource, we don't want to infringe on it, but we also respect our citizens. This will help our community, this will increase our tax base. There's so many positives that if we can work with these residents, it's going to be better off for everyone involved. And I think we need to switch our focus and stop worrying so much about if we get audited or if this happens, because there's always going to be those things. If I go out today, I might get hit by a car. If there's like, we can't live in that fear. We need to say, look, these are objectives. We want to preserve the waterway. We want to keep our natural resource the best that it can, but we want to work with our citizens. And in turn, that's going to help our city increase our tax base, and it's going to be better for the longevity of these homes, that they're safe, they're well maintained, and they are going to try to continue to look presentable and keep Mequon. So I think could be a bigger objective. Now I understand that, our focus is this timeline, and my concern is to pass something that we knowingly know is wrong, and then say we're going to come back to it, and then 3 years go by, and now someone's paying for flood insurance because they increased the base flood elevation on this home unjustifiably, and now they're no longer in compliance, so now they're paying $3,000, $6,000 extra in insurance. And how do we justify that? Knowing that this needs more work. And that's my largest concern out of all of this. So I feel like there needs to be a forward conversation in regards to some of those things.
So that being said, Jack, obviously we want to approve something or recommend something tonight just to keep this moving so that we're included in the mix, right? But beyond that, I don't think any of the aldermen sitting at the Common Council meeting really wanted to just pass this without significant further review. Would it be appropriate to, with any recommendation tonight, that we set a timeline to bring this back to Planning Commission to review after some of this due diligence has been done, and we can give a full and more thorough report on that? And if so, what is that timeline?
Well, I guess that's up to the commission. I mean, again, I'd have to know more about what review you want done, because again, if it's a look at the modeling, that's going to cost significant dollars, and that's something the council's going to have to budget for. I guess this is a recommending body, so you can recommend to the council whatever you think is necessary to move this process forward. I'm not 100% sure what that is. And I agree with most things you said, but in terms of the audit, I'm concerned about an audit because
Yep.
my name's on this. So, and I'm sure the council wouldn't be happy if I did something wrong and then we got suspended from the program because of some mistakes staff made.
Right.
So we have to be protective of that end of it. So.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate the position that, several of us have stated. You've done a really nice job being equitable on this and trying to be reasonable. And if there's some vagueness to it, the worst thing we can do as a legislative body is put vague ordinances in and leave it up to personal opinion. Because then when you do get audited, somebody's going to get pushed into something that's going to be in non-compliance. So just simply to state what it is and have them review it and approve what we've put forward and make sure that it's in compliance at that time is definitely appropriate. Alderman Talaco.
The last thing that I would mention, and Jack can probably verify this, but from what I read about the National Flood Insurance Plan, those that are currently a part of it, if the city decides not to be a part of it, cannot be dropped from their insurance. is what I had read in it. So if we didn't make this timeline, and it would need to be verified, I don't think that the homes currently a part of it would be dropped, so they would still have coverage. So that's also maybe another thing that we could look at in order to give us more time to make the right choices.
And I'm not 100% sure on that. I think you could probably get, a lot of them could probably pick up federal or non-federal insurance, private insurance, but some may not. And I'm not sure exactly how that works. I know, at least from in 2007 when I was here, when the maps were changed, a lot of people didn't know about it until 2008, 2009 when they refied their mortgage. And then their bank said, wait a minute, you're in the floodplain. And they're like, what are you talking about? And then all of a sudden they had to get flood insurance, and then they had to pay, a significant dollar amount. So it doesn't happen overnight, but I don't know. I would just caution that if we are going to go down that path, we should get our attorney involved and make sure that we're not doing something that we're not anticipating happening, because that's a big difference, being suspended from the program versus just, letting people slowly find out that their insurance rates are going to go up. So,
Right.
No, my understanding is that those citizens their houses would still be covered under the NFIP.
So we'll confirm that for council.
Yeah.
we'll have to get Brian involved in that, because that's a legal opinion, and I guess I'd wonder how that would work, because if then why would anybody be in the program if they still were eligible? There has to be a time frame for that, or some sort of cutoff for that, because then everybody would opt out and take advantage of both worlds. So, but we'll look into that. We'll try to figure that out.
The only other option that I heard brought forward, I don't know that it impacts what we're doing today. I mean, I think the recommendation of this with some level of change, if we choose to change anything or as presented, it needs to come out of this body today to go to council to keep the timeline moving. But one of the other considerations was looking at a secondary insurance policy that the city could maybe take out or find a way to do that. Somebody brought that up, as another option. I don't know how that would get funded or how that would work. But that is another option that was brought to the table just for consideration at a later date. Any further discussion? Commissioner Stoker.
I think it'd be the biggest disservice to our community is if we did not make the deadline and we got cut from the program. I'm dealing with this in a condo in Florida, and if you have the city attorney look at it, I'd also have someone that specializes in insurance, because there's different types of flood insurance. The insurance that couldn't be dropped is personal possessions and things like that, but disaster, if your house gets washed off the face of the earth, your insurance may not cover you for that, and that's where FEMA would step in. In my case, my entire building is gone, and I'm fighting both my personal possessions because there was nothing left, and as a condo association, we're working with, you have to make the decision. Do you want to have to go after FEMA? It's a huge uphill battle to do it, but FEMA did step to the plate and covered about 60% of the replacement cost of the buildings. We think they should be doing more, but anyway, just make sure that there's someone that really understands flood insurance. And I think even the bigger picture here is flood insurance right now is not something, there are definitely situations where if you have it, you don't want to lose it because you may not be able to get new policies. So I go back to my initial statement. The worst thing we could do for our community is to be forced out of this the FEMA program by not complying with these dates. Even if we didn't make a single another change to what you presented, it's my opinion that you should make that deadline with, at the very least, this. If there's other changes, that's great, but I don't know how much we can really get accomplished between now and July.
Agreed. Anybody else? Commissioner Hawley?
I'm going to agree with John. I think we have to move forward, and the thing is, we didn't create this problem. We're just trying to go with the new data. So as much as some of the residents may not like the results of it, we can't ignore it. And I think getting suspended from the program would be disastrous. If something did happen, they would come back to us and say, you guys knew about this and you didn't do anything.
I agree fully. I think the program provides options for residents and to participate in it only gives them options moving forward. So I'd look for a motion to recommend, and then with whichever changes and potentially talking about that egress size and square footage, because I see Commissioner Stoker reaching 60.
I'll make a motion that we do recommend this go to council as is. I think there can be further conversation at council with respect to, you're going to investigate the square footage on a covered roof. I'm fine with whatever you come up with. And I guess by the end of my motion would be that under all circumstances, we are going to get at the very least this and comply with this by the deadline. If there's other changes, I'm comfortable with staff's making those decisions.
Yeah, we'll work with the city attorney, and again, this will be vetted at council by probably all of our council members, so there'll be still eyes on this going forward.
Second.
Do we need a roll call or just need a general consensus?
You can do a voice vote, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, any other discussion? All of those in favor of recommending this to council as Commissioner Stoker stated and Commissioner Barnes seconded, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That recommendation goes forth to council. Thank you, everybody. The second policy item is the Chapter 58-303, Arrival Corridor Specific Development and Design Standards. Did anyone come forward wishing to speak on this? Are there any cards?
Mr. Zabchuk's raising his hand.
Thank you. Tom Zabchuk, Lakeside Development Company. I'm in favor of this proposed amendment. Lakeside owns property in the arrival corridor, and a little history. We had purchased the lumber shed a number of years ago, which was 6 acres, and then we sold 2 acres to P2 Development, Bob Bach, who built the apartment, the 81-unit apartment. And then we also sold a portion, another 2 acres, to another group that did a senior care development, a 30-bed facility. Then we ended up purchasing the 2 acres to the west. And then I came to the Planning Commission to get put this whole thing together as a PUD and incorporate all the properties into this PUD. And then I came to the Commission and Common Council and got an approval for 2 25,000 square foot office buildings. It's a few years back. And we haven't had any activity. And I think Alderman Parrish would realize that that area really is not suitable for retail or even office. And we've talked about doing some housing. And we have a proposal. We'd like to do somewhere around 40 units of townhouses in that area of the little more than 4 acres. And I think that would be best suited for that property. So I would appreciate your consideration on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack? Kim?
Good evening, Planning
How's it?
Commission. Almost as much history as FEMA, maybe almost as technical, but maybe not quite as much. As I stated in the memo, really the only substantive change here is allowing under a PUD process in the arrival corridor district, allowing a development to seek out the opportunity to have more than 16 units per the development site. So there's intricacies in these terms and how they're defined. So building means one thing. A dwelling actually is referring to the structure itself. So when we talk about a multiple family dwelling, up to 16 units, we're actually talking about the structure and not necessarily the overall development. So there's some intricacies with how we had to correct some of that. What happened in 2017 with the text amendment that I think created some inconsistencies or some challenges with some interpretations the goal there was to no longer allow your typical or your traditional apartment style building and have a straight residential development. So the 3 stories with all apartments with your typical, interior corridor entryway into the units was something that the city no longer wanted to continue to see. Multiple family dwellings of various sizes was still acceptable, but we created some design standards. So you could only be 2 stories. You can't go up to 3. You had to have individual front entrances at the ground level. You couldn't even have a separate segregated unit up on the 2nd floor. So so there's no more stacked units. In addition, there were some locational limitations. So in the arrival corridor, which is everything on Mequon Road, just kind of west of Bunch Rock, it was always intended to be less massing, less compact, and a little bit more, I guess spread out, I guess is the opposite of compact. The change there was that you could no longer have a dwelling structure that had more than 16 units, regardless. In town center, you could continue to have a structure that had more than 16 dwelling units in it, but it had to be part of a mixed-use development. It had to be a master plan site that had some commercial elements somewhere within the development. It took it a step further to say that if you fronted on Mequon Road, or if you were on Cedarburg Road, south of Mequon Road, and you wanted to do more than 16 units per the structure, it had to be part of a mixed-use building. In that case, though, when you're mixing the dwelling units and the commercial in one building, and we're saying that you can no longer have a 2nd-story unit without a 1st-floor entry, and you look at the definition of mixed-use building and it says 75% of the ground floor has to be dedicated to commercial, there's no way you're going to get individual units with front doors, right? So those are some of the things that we just cleaned up. The language does not change any of that policy intent or goal. What we are suggesting, though, in the arrival corridor under the PUD is that someone would have the legal right to ask for more than 16 units per the entire development. You wouldn't be able to have more than 16 per building. You just could have more on the development site. One of the prospective projects that came forward recently is a 2-acre site. Now, per the base zoning and density, in the arrival corridor, you're allowed 16 units per 1 acre. So in theory, under the PUD, a baseline for all of us to evaluate and for the council to evaluate when we're looking at whether we really want to approve the PUD or not is to understand what the proposed density is in comparison to that base density. Because in a PUD, you have to at least have 1 acre to be eligible. What we don't want to create is a situation where we're motivating developers to split a 2-acre parcel and do a 1-acre PUD with 16 units, and then another 1-acre site with 16 units immediately next to it, and there's no cohesive or comprehensive plan associated with it. So the way it's written right now, someone could circumvent the process or circumvent the zoning to do that. You, the council, have no obligation to approve a PUD. You don't have to cite justifications like you typically do if you were to deny a conditional use grant. The city can just say no and change this. I guess I would also add that there are so many other, not only technical standards, like a quantitative standard in the zoning districts, there are also so many design standards that lead to the quality of the development. So regardless of density, I think the city staff, developers have brought forward projects that ultimately have proven to be, not only very beautiful in terms of the context of the neighborhood, but have brought forward high quality, high valued projects that are going to last, have good design standards that stand the test of time. And certainly we've been financially successful. As a reminder, since about 2015, these two zoning districts and the assistance of the incentives through the TID, although those are no longer available, we have increased the tax base of this neighborhood by close to 300%. It's actually 286%. And really only half of the parcels in the neighborhood have developed. So that's a pretty significant success. I do think the changes with, the 3-story typical traditional apartments, I think, it is pushing developers who want to, now get into this neighborhood that has established itself a little bit more and kind of set the tone for some high quality living environments and quality of life space. I think it's a good move to ask them to do a little bit more. If you want density or if you want more dwelling units per structure, we're going to ask you to ante up with some other features like some commercial uses. The issue that Mr. Zabchek, though, is asking for, and it's really not addressed in our proposed text amendment, is the parcel that he's talking about does front on Mequon Road. So any residential development at that location would have to have at least 30%, would have to have 75% commercial space on the ground floor. So the Planning Commission could consider in that arrival corridor district dropping the percentage of commercial on the ground floor. Again, it does make some sense if you think about the philosophical baseline of the difference between the town center and the arrival corridor. That being and looking and feeling a little bit more residential would certainly be within the context of the neighborhood. It's immediately across from Concord Creek. The commercial development that is there, like Mid-State Insurance, Summers, right? It's not your typical office or retail. So that would be something you could consider if you want to think about what Lakeside and Tom Zabchek has sought out here. Or you can give us direction to work on what that might be, and as we advance it to council, we could make that suggestion.
I was telling Alderman Parrish I was ready to raise my hand. So I'm used to it. So I have a question for you on the 16 versus the 8. The 8 units is permitted, but the 16 is conditional. Mm-hmm. Is that what we have in place for zoning? I thought it was only 8.
No, we have that in place right now. Again, that's another way the zoning is structured and how the density ties in. Initially, we as a community decided that, if it's 8 units or less, we're going to streamline the process, right? Because we were trying to add rooftops to try to attract more commercial development. So that's always been in there, and that hasn't changed.
So just sharing, like, my goals as an alderman were to always have this be as mixed use as we possibly could, right? The ROI for residential is the highest right now, and it's the most exciting, and it's what most developers are coming forward with. So what I want to make sure of in this process that we're preserving as much of that mixed use vision for town center. We don't need it as another living space. As a council, we decided we wanted this as a gathering area. But we need a good hefty portion of residential in there, which is why we approved, the apartments up to this point and several of the other things. So just as we're talking about policy and as we're looking at changing things, I want to highlight that kind of sentiment that came from the council previously. Again, tonight we can talk about and propose whatever we want to for the Common Council. Alderman Parrish?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director Tollefson. Good overview. I think I've gotten some calls from developers over the years, too, on this site, and just frustrated with the way the code was written. So good job to staff kind of being proactive about this and trying to make this more efficient and clear for developers as they're calling in. I'm in favor with all your changes. I do have one edit to the document. And I'll come back to it, but if you could just pull up in your proposed changes on 162 item J. Are you able to do that, Jack, or no? But then I was thinking about what Mr. Zabchek was saying and Alderman Strelchek, and there certainly is different. I think the city does have different objectives for commercial, like much more commercial in the town center than in the arrival corridor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you're saying that it currently is written where 75% of the first floor in the arrival corridor is to be commercial. I don't know that that's the right policy at all. We may just be setting up, I mean, developers might just agree to that so they can get their development approved, and then the space is just gonna sit there vacant. That's what I've seen with other developments. So I don't, you know, we always say we don't want this submarket to be competing with this retail submarket. Well, what retail submarket are we really trying to get, you know, on the arrival corridor? You know, no, I'm not talking about any leniency for town center. I'm very supportive, but I get the other word that you could have said, Kim, was transitional. Arrival corridor is meant to be transitional, unless, you know, so I'm open to it going down. I hesitate to throw out a number now. It's tempting to go less than 50%, but I don't want to be too drastic without you. I respect your thoughts on this, and maybe you want to recommend a better number, but
I would say a minimum you'd want a third, so 33%. That could still be too high.
I don't know. I guess I'd like my colleagues up here to weigh in, and then just before I quiet down, did you end up pulling that up? Yep. Are we missing?
Actually, I think the section on the percentage is under the mixed use building definition. So Jack, it's on
Okay.
page 160.
I have a second topic I'll get to.
Yeah. So we did not change that 75%. You know, and Jack will probably remember this too. I mean, we were concerned, obviously, introducing mixed use initially, right back in 2007 in a suburban, you know, market of circumventions that developers could use to kind of create, you know, fake storefronts or fake like vestibules that were not residential, but then essentially have an entrance with a staircase right up to something else. So we were, you know, very conscientious about that standard and some others to make sure that it was actually true residential. I think the way it's written in other protections of the code, it's fine. We're covered with that. But that's where you would want to change your 75% down to something else.
Do you have further research you need to do on the subject, or is that something you think we should vet tonight? Maybe we can come back in the future on that one.
Yeah, we could come back with maybe a more thoughtful number. I just probably wouldn't want to go down below 33. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, my concern with that, though, is some of our other standards in these, well, maybe not here. In the specific development standards, we're kind of saying that we're not going to let a PUD trigger a change. You know what I mean? So we'd have to, I think we have to.
That's why you should come back.
Yeah,
So,
I think we maybe shouldn't draft this on the fly.
and just so I can be quiet then for the night, my only other change was on page 162, that section J. It says, commercial uses or multifamily dwellings greater than 16 units are prohibited in the arrival corridor. It feels like maybe we should have some wording in there, unless part of a PUD, just to be consistent with our intentions here.
Well, actually, again, this multiple family dwellings means the structure. So back in 2017, we did not want the multiple family structures in arrival corridor to have more than 16. Your development site could have more. It just means if you have 30 some units, you've got to break it up into 2 buildings.
Is that defined somewhere?
I had
Dwellings
to,
versus
if it makes
structures
you feel
and
better, I had to do this
Yeah.
to remind myself of
Sure. Is dwellings
the method of the madness here, the March Madness.
is dwellings defined in the code pretty clearly for developers trying to understand this? Structures versus
It is defined as a structure, yes. But I think in other terminology that we used in the zoning district, that could get lost in the particular
might,
town center
yeah.
arrival corridor.
Great, thank you.
So we do or do not want to call it out? Do we want to call out structure?
I think she explained it. Unless
I think so too, but
as long as it's dwellings and what that means, as long as dwellings is defined as a structure somewhere else, it's not in this area.
It's in the definition section
Somewhere
of the
else. So
zoning
yeah,
code.
you just have to remember what it is. and
Yes.
perfect. So Kim, what do you need from us tonight? Recommendation? Do you need just open discussion, or what do you?
Yeah, we'd be looking for a recommendation to forward to the Common Council for their consideration and action. If you would like us to come back with a change to that, with a recommendation to a change to that 70%, 75%, we could do that at the April meeting, and then just update the council on that recommendation, so it doesn't necessarily have to slow down the process or the timeline. If you want to set some parameters to what that number needs to be and let staff figure it out further and advance it to council without coming back, we can do that too. But if you want to take a look at it, it wouldn't necessarily put a wrinkle in the timeline.
So what data are you going to look at to help educate you on your decision for a number? Is there something you're going to, it's a number. Is there some data that says, 30% allows for this versus 40 or 50? I guess what is going to make you change your mind or come up with a number?
Probably looking at some other projects that we like. Not just in Mequon. We'd probably look at our existing ones, but we'd probably look at some other communities and kind of see what that results in. And we could do a hierarchy. I mean, that's definitely the way the process is set up here with so many other things. There's a hierarchy to permitted conditional PUD and densities, so that wouldn't be unique to this district.
Just from a timing standpoint, I didn't know if you were going to huddle and say, okay, 35 is the number, or if you're going to actually go out and. It would be interesting to give us some examples.
Yeah.
That would be helpful, I think.
Yeah.
Because I can't picture 30 versus 60%.
Yeah, and a lot of our developments now, the residential structures tend to have like a sales office, a concierge, room. Even if there was, one additional sort of entertainment space, or maybe, another coffee shop within that building that was open up to the public, you could probably get to the 30% ground floor pretty quickly. So maybe it's also defining it as those types of uses. So you just need to tell me if you'd like me to come back with some more detail on that one.
So, straw poll on whether or not we want to see it to come back. Just, do you want to see it come back and review those percentages? Got 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds like that's the course of action for tonight.
And that would be just for arrival corridor. Keep it at the 75 for, okay.
Yeah, which percentage recommendation and why?
Okay, sounds good.
Maybe something to bring up to council, that figure, maybe the council could provide a little direction as to what we're feeling on council as well.
Yeah, we could possibly do that at the April meeting, and then that way the planning commission meeting would be after it, so then
For sure.
could, yeah.
Just to give a little feedback based on the pulse of the council.
Yeah, great.
So that it's a smooth process. And then looks like we're done with that, and the next agenda item is just announcements. Next meeting is on Monday, April 29th, 2024 at 6 p.m. We just need one more motion. Got a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.